Welcome, everyone. Feel free to keep your lunch, of course, and there's probably more back there if you want to refill during the events, that's fine. It's a busy time of year. If you need to leave early, we will understand. I won't take notes. It will not impact your tenure decision in any way. My name is Ken Doxey. I'm Vice Provost for Academic Affairs. I'm amazed to see so many people here to learn about this topic today. Before I start, I have to tell you that we are recording the event. So if you have reason not to want to appear on screen, then if Gretchen turns the camera toward you, make sure to duck under the table. The title, there are so many people here that I started thinking that maybe I mistitled the workshop, but I don't really think so. Looking around the audience and see those I might expect to see. This is focused on tenure-related faculty who are currently untenured. If you're a non-tenure-related faculty, you're also an untenured faculty. The tenure part of the workshop wouldn't necessarily apply to you. And we will have other workshops later in the term and later in the year that would be more specifically addressing non-tenure-related faculty. But if that's you, you're welcome to stay. Much of what I have to say will be important and useful to you. The details about tenure, less so, of course. Again, I'm Ken Doxey. Before I start, I wanted to point out those that make my workday pleasant. Sonia Runberg is standing by the door. She and Tammy Orr, who is hiding behind the table, wait a minute, were responsible for all the organization for today, and I would like to thank them for that. Pam Palanek from Academic Affairs is sitting in the midst. Supports us all. And starting this year, I think maybe last year, we've started to capture presentations on videotape. And Gretchen Drew, our communications specialist today. Barbara Altman, Senior Vice Provost for Academic Affairs, is in that. And there are too many of you to go around and do self-introductions, so I'll just say welcome to all of you. I see a variety of faculty and deans and associate deans and folks of that persuasion here. I have a set of slides to go through. I have lots of stories to tell. I hope the information I have will be useful to you. Please feel free to interrupt me at any time for questions, and I hope there will be plenty of time at the end for questions as well, but there's no need to wait till then. Check with Gretchen. It's best for me not to stand in front of the slides, but I don't care. Okay. Overview of what we'll talk about. Let me first just talk briefly about what promotion and tenure looks like at the University of Oregon. I will highlight the fact that promotion and tenure consideration is not something that is inflicted at a moment in time, but it's rather the culmination of a long period starting from your being hired at the University of Oregon, through which we provide you help, I hope, critical appraisal, and evaluation, and assistance as you move along the way. So rather than viewing this as something that suddenly appears, recognize that you've already started this process. We'll talk about specific timelines for the promotion and tenure process and the way it works. I'll talk, although for some of you, if you're, I guess I want to get some rough sense of the audience. How many of you are facing preparing tenure and promotion files in the fairly recent or near future, say 1 to 2 years out? Okay, and how many are looking at a longer time frame than that, maybe you're relatively new hires? Okay, so about roughly split. I think we have a workshop specifically focusing on those of you who are going to be preparing your files this year as well. But this will be helpful to you. That workshop, you might want to come back to that because it'll have a little bit of extra detail as well. I'll talk briefly, and this is good for the more recent hires as well, to know from the start what sorts of things you'll be needing to put together so you can start collecting things and make it less painful when it's time to really put the file together. I'll talk a little bit about departmental responsibilities. That'll be good for the department heads and deans that are here. and for you, the candidates as well, to help your department and know what needs to be done in case he or she forgets. I'll conclude with a few things that can lead to a somewhat more complicated review so that you know up front what to avoid if at all possible. And then again, if there are remaining questions that haven't been addressed during the presentation, feel free to stay and we'll talk about them next. U of O is a very high research activity, Carnegie One University, member of the prestigious AAU. We've heard so much about that, I won't spend more time on it. What that adds up to say is that we have very high standards and high expectations for those that we hire. That said, we hire very well. We have a very high success rate in the promotion and tenure process. And the reason for that, I believe, is that we hire very well. I think we mentor very well in some quarters and maybe less well in other quarters, and we're working on that, but overall we have a very strong mentorship program. And I think we provide important advice at the right moments of a career to ensure that going through the tenure process is a happy and successful thing. So in a typical year, it would not be unusual for us to award tenure to all the candidates who come up for tenure. It would also not be unusual for us to deny tenure to 1 or 2 out of 30 to 40 candidates that may be coming up for tenure. It's not a given. Nobody expects that. We've done well. You're here. We want you to be here. We want you to do well so that you can be here. I'm not going to try to push it. Trajectory is in all caps. It's shouting at you. That's a word I want you to remember always. The trajectory of your career is the most important thing we're evaluating as you go through any evaluation, really. A contract renewal evaluation, I'll mention that briefly. It's not a topic for today. We want to see that you're on the right track. Tenure's a big deal, right? It's us saying we would like you to be our colleague forever. We want to have an expectation for what sort of colleague you're going to be with respect to your research, your teaching, and your service. So trajectory is the key word. We're looking at your combined activity in these 3 areas that leads us to believe that we can predict the future with a reasonable degree of certainty. Your research or scholarship or creative practice, one thing I really like about this university is I think we do a pretty good job of being careful not to focus on one thing as representative of scholarship. Research. Okay. What if you're a sculptor? Oh, we have one in the audience. You just give me thumbs up, I believe. There could be a research component to it, but creative practice is maybe a more descriptive term for that. Or you're a composition specialist or advanced. Creating new information, new knowledge, new experience in your field is how we try to capture what we loosely call research. In teaching, we're looking for you to be striving to be excellent in fostering learning in students. And we are an institution that has both undergraduate and graduate programs. So unless you're in an undergraduate-only program, we would expect you to be exerting your influence in the teaching realm at the undergraduate and graduate levels. Service, we want to see that you care about this place, about your department, about your university, about your community, regional and professional, and that you're participating appropriately for your rank. This is a pretty strong term. I'm not sure that that's the right term to use, but here it is on the slide. I want to dispel any potential notions about these 2 particular things up front. And if you have other concerns that might fall in this sort of realm, please let me know and we'll address them as well. One is that we do not hire people that we can't afford to keep. We don't bring in tenure-related faculty knowing that we won't have a slot for them budgetarily in 5 or 6 years and we'll just deny tenure because we can't afford them. It's not done. I don't know if that's done any place, but I'm not going to argue for others. It's not done here. We hire you because we think you're awesome, and we have every hope and every belief that you will succeed, and we will do everything we can to help you succeed. Single person is not going to dictate your tenure outcome. Professor X at University Y hates me, boy, I sure hope they don't ask that person to write a letter of evaluation for me because I'll kill him. I spent 11 years at the NSF as a program director. I talked to lots of people who knew who the person was who was going to kill their proposal. Don't send it to this person, he hates me, and you need to send it to a different person. And it would turn out that I had sent it to the person they were worried about, and that person could politely decline, saying, you know, I don't think I could be objective about this. Please find somebody else. I had found somebody else. It was the person said I should have sent it to. And you know, friends are friends, but professionals are professionals. And that person was typically the one that had decimated. That said, that single person does not dictate the process. We have a system, I'll describe it to you. It starts at your department. It goes through a series of external reviewers. It goes to an elected faculty committee that advises your dean. Then goes to the dean, then goes to the elected faculty committee representing the entire university, and finally goes to the provost. Now, if there's one person who's got an axe to grind in there, whether it's an external reviewer or a departmental colleague or a department head or a dean, we have plenty of independent voices and opinions looking at the file. And I can assure you that if a single person dictates the tenure denial, it would only be because that single person was the one that really could see and understand what the problem was. That's a little piece I've just been writing advice to review committees. It's not fair to assume that a single person who says something different from the rest is wrong. It's important to consider that person and make sure that that person wasn't right and everybody else missed the point. But this said, the message I really learned to spell is don't worry about a person out there controlling your fate. All right? I started by saying, yes?
I'm having a little trouble hearing.
Should I use a microphone? This is more people than we usually have in the room, and you might be absorbing my voice. Let me try this. Is this better?
Yeah.
All right, thank you for pointing that out. I already mentioned, and those in the front were able to hear me, that the promotion and tenure process is the culmination of a long period of time that starts with your hiring. A typical applicant for a faculty position, stand up and wait here a little bit more, Gretchen can still get it. There may have been 50 or 100 or 200 or more applicants for the position that you hold. We had the opportunity to look at a lot of people, to be very thoughtful and deliberative, and we picked you. We did that for a reason, because we think you're great. So we've made our initial assessment. Okay. That's a good place to start. You don't have to prove anything to us because we know you're good. We just want to make sure that we stay that way. The most common pattern is that the promotion and tenure consideration would culminate 6 years after your hire. So at the end of your 6th year, you would be offered tenure and promotion. It's not uncommon for people to have moved here from another position. In the contract and negotiation process, they would have been offered credit for prior service. And I'm going to get calibrated on this too. How many of you have a rewarded credit for prior service when you came here? Quite a few. Anybody that doesn't know, I won't ask you to raise your hand, but you might want to find that out. This is one of the things that will show up again in things that can complicate a case. So let me spend a few minutes talking about this right now. How this works, maybe you were an assistant professor somewhere else and you moved here as an assistant professor and the university and the department and the provost negotiated and offered you a couple years of credit for that service. Meaning that your tenure clock has already been ticking. What does that mean? It means, let's say you were awarded 2 years of credit. Well, then the end of your 6th year of service could be as soon as the end of your 4th year here at the University of Oregon. That would be the timing if you used all of your credit for prior service. That's a pretty simple case for everybody to look at because they look at the period of time for which you were awarded credit for prior service and the time you were at the university, and look at what you accomplished in your scholarship, teaching, and service during that time, and make decisions or recommendations. Your contract, if you have credit for prior service, is worded so that your tenure decision may be considered by the time frame that I just described to you. It will also have a line that says tenure is required by, and it'll be June 15th of a year that's 6 years from the time you started. We're legally required to make a tenure decision by the end of your 6th year of employment. You're not legally required to use all or any of the credit that we awarded you for prior service, so that tenure must be decided by is 6 years from when you started. If you make that choice, the reviewers and the review committees are going to focus their attention on your 6 years at the University of Oregon. You were awarded credit for prior service, but you chose not to use it, so we have a full pre-tenure period of time to look at the University of Oregon, and that's the primary focus of the reviewers. Doesn't mean they'll ignore things that you did earlier, but it means that those things will have somewhat secondary consideration. So maybe you're in a field where publishing a book is the currency to tenure. A published book is typically in your field than what it takes to get tenure. If your book came out in the period of time before you came to the U of O, you were awarded credit for a prior service, but you didn't use it, you had your full period of review at the University of Oregon and nothing else came out. I'm going to refer back to the word in all caps, the trajectory. Yes, you had the book, but we don't have a simple quantitative metric for receiving tenure. There is an academic judgment involved at every stage of review and decision. So in a case like that, the judgment might well be, started out really promising, so promising that we offered you a tenure-related position here, but nothing has happened since then. That's not a positive trajectory. And so that work that was given secondary consideration because you spent the full pre-tenure period of time here at the U of O, that work's going to carry less weight. I think that's pretty clear to see. The greatest complexity may come if you use some of the credit for prior service, and I'm really pleased with the collective bargaining agreement language and how this works, in that the primary focus of the review is basically a 6-year window. It's really closer to a 5-year window because your tenure package gets put in at the end of your 5th year, as I'll show you in a minute. If you say you had credit for 2 years of prior service, but you used only one of them, then most of the full period of time was spent at the U of O. There's a sliding window where the primary focus is going to be on the years, the 5 to 6 years preceding the tenure consideration. Okay. So again, if you use all the credit, it's simple enough to do that calculation. If you use none of it, it's easy to understand that the primary focus is on the University of Oregon time. And if you use some of the credit, then there's going to be that sliding window that's going to look at some of your work during the period prior to U of O as a primary period, but not all of it. Okay. If I haven't completely confused you, we'll come back to this later and you can ask more questions. Once we hire you, we don't wait 5 years and then say time to put your tenure package together and give you another year to worry and then award you tenure or not. There are other check-in points. There are annual reviews carried out in your department. Take those seriously. You have the opportunity to meet with your department or unit head to discuss the result of the annual review. You should do so. And make sure you read carefully. Your department wants you to be successful. They're going to do their best, provide the best information they can to you every year along the way, if not more often through informal guidance, to make sure you succeed. If they're telling you important things starting from the first year annual review and you're not hearing those important things, then there's a disconnect. If they're providing what they feel is the best, most valuable advice they can give you, you need to pay attention. Okay? So make sure to take these annual reviews very seriously. So second opportunity to take things more seriously. Typically, unless you're hired with so many years of credit for prior service, an initial contract would lead to the promotion and tenure consideration. Most of you, if not all of you, were hired with contracts that don't lead all the way to the tenure decision. If you're a new assistant professor, tenure decision is required 6 years out. You've probably got a 3-year contract. That means your contract needs to be renewed. In the CBA, we refer to either midterm evaluation or contract renewal evaluation. It's just that. It's basically kind of a mini pre-tenure review. Your department is going to look at how your research or scholarship program is developing, how your teaching program is going, what your contributions to service look like, and they're going to make an evaluation at that point about what the trajectory, coming back to that term, looks like. If it looks like everything's great, we're really excited about how things are going, you're going to be offered a second contract that leads to the tenure decision. If there are some concerns, if they're minor concerns, they'll appear in the form of recommendations. Things seem to be going pretty well. Keep careful attention on the publication record, or see if you could get some help with your teaching. Whatever specifics might be, it could still be a 3-year contract renewal, but with some alert to you about things you might want to pay attention to. In the extreme, those alerts might be of enough concern to the department or to the dean or the provost that you would be offered a second contract that doesn't lead to a tenure decision, but instead to an intermediate range renewal that would lead to a second review, a second contract renewal review that would then lead you to the tenure decision. There's a third possible outcome, and we have a separate workshop on contract renewal review, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, and some of you are looking frightened, so I apologize for that. There is a third possibility, and that is that your third-year review, the department, the dean, and the provost would say, you know, they'll find a really nice way to put it, but the message is, for whatever reason, we don't think this position is the right position for you. And at that point, there would be a terminal contract and plans for future life that you get. Okay. All those things can happen, but don't stress about it. Just, again, remember you were hired with high expectations and in the most positive of ways. And we have every hope that review will be successful. It's, of course, an important evaluation point along the way, so that a tenure decision 3 years later, again, is not completely out of the blue. It's informed by past experience. Question?
Yeah, Ken, when is the timeline for the contract renewal? If that contract ends at 3 years, is there a time that needs to be done, completed?
I'm just preparing to work on guidance documents for that. I'm not fully up on things, but it basically needs to be completed in time for the contract to be renewed in a timely way. So before the end of your third year. I believe that that review would probably start, I'm looking for my CBA experts, in the fall term of the third year.
Winter, yeah, commonly.
Fall or winter. Okay. It doesn't involve external review. It doesn't have the time frame of a full tenure review, but it needs to be started in time that the recommendations can be worked up the line. Yes?
In CAS, it's due on the package is due to CAS on the 10th of April this year. So you have to have done it all and have the package into CAS by then.
All right, thank you. So the comment was in College of Arts and Sciences, the package has to be to the dean's office, right?
Yes.
By April 10th. And by the time the package reaches the dean's office, the department has already done all its consideration and deliberation, so the process has to start appropriately before that. Okay. And of course, the actual PMP process that we're here to talk about today is the end point of this evaluative stretch. I always have to tell stories. I'm flashing out this one. Before I became a professor, I decided I would interview for industrial positions in a chemist so that I would know what my students were going through. I was at breakfast with an industry representative in Pennsylvania, sitting, and we were talking, having a nice time, chatting about this and that, and then he said, oh, I should get you your schedule. and you push the schedule across to me, it said 7 a.m. breakfast interview. That was, I should have known it, but nobody told me this. Every moment I was in that company's presence, I was being evaluated and interviewed. There was no free breakfast. It was part of the process. So we're judging you all the time. Maybe I shouldn't have said it, but it's important. You're judging me too. But it's important to know that. Do your best. You know, when you write that email, check the punctuation and spelling. What does the process look like? Starting in the fall, or especially in the winter term of the year before your tenure decision. So if you're a new assistant professor in your 5th year, fairly early in your 5th year, probably winter term, maybe as early as fall, your department head's going to tell you, hey, you know, next year is the year. And we're going to have to start getting things together. I'm not addressing credit for prior service, and I think we're still working out the details in that. You're going to know when you're eligible for consideration if you have credit for prior service. If you don't know that, find out. Your department head's going to know that too. But the initial discussion is a little bit different. If you're eligible for consideration but you're not required to, then there's a judgment call to make. What do you think? I came with 4 years of credit for prior service. I used 3 of them because when I was first eligible to come up, I thought about it and said, you know, I'm doing fine. I can get tenure. I'm not really worried about it. But I lost a fair bit of time. I'm an experimental chemist. I had to move my full laboratory. I lost an appreciable amount of time by moving here from another institution. I decided I didn't want to just be okay for tenure. I wanted the dean to remember me forever, and so I delayed my tenure for a year. So there's that sort of judgment. You want people to be enthusiastic about your case. You're not required to come up, and you only get to come up for tenure once. So you don't want to do it at the wrong time. So you make a judgment. Anyhow, fall or winter, you're going to be aware that you need to prepare materials if it's a required decision year. We'll talk about what you need to provide, but basically it's going to be a CV and a statement and then some other things we'll see in a few minutes. You will help your department during the winter and spring identify, and you won't solicit, you'll need to help them identify potential external reviewers for your file. And let's not talk about the details of that, but I have provided a guidance document to departments with great detail about how that process might work. The department will solicit those external reviewers during the spring and during the summer, so that when the fall of the year in which your tenure has to be considered arrives, the department should have a full complement of external reviews. They will then go through a departmental process. Most departments have a personnel or a promotion committee. Some do not. Some, like chemistry, define all the voting faculty as the promotion committee. That group, whatever it is, will get together, discuss, prepare a report, and a vote on your case. The vote is a recommendation. All the votes up until the provost's determination are recommendations. We'll prepare the vote. I'm sorry, that will then, I'll have it on here, that will go through the department head who will prepare an independent appraisal and recommendation. That report is then sent to the school or college, the dean's office. Each of the schools and colleges currently uses a personnel committee, though they're not required to. And that personnel committee is convened by the deans. I believe they're all elected. There may be some appointed, and the CBA allows for either an elected or appointed personnel committee at this level. That group of faculty will evaluate the case independently and prepare a report and evaluation and vote on it. That is sent to the dean, who prepares an independent report and evaluation and recommendation. That's happening during the fall and winter. During which time I'm starting to get nervous because the process culminates with the dean's office sending the files to academic affairs. I confirm at that point that everything is appropriately filed and appropriately filed within the file. I can be a good bureaucrat what I need to be and make sure that these documents are complete and accurate. The file then goes to the faculty personnel committee. This is an elected university-wide group. There are 12 members, 6 from CAS and 1 from each of the other professional schools, who will independently study the entire document, vote to make a recommendation to the provost. The provost then receives all of this and makes a decision. Again, that's the only decision that is made. Everything else is advisory to the provost. That decision, we target May 1st, and over the past 4 years, I think, when we first announced this May 1st date, we've been very good at making all these announcements at that time. We used to do rolling announcements, like history lessons. The reason we decided we didn't like that is because if you say you were 2 of you in your department up for promotion and tenure, and your colleague heard at the end of fall term and you didn't hear anything and it was May, you started to get nervous. And it might simply be that the dean's office lost your file. That would never happen. But there are a lot of these files. Somebody has to be last. They can't all happen at the same time. And so the provost at that time said, you know, this is the timing of these announcements is so stressful. Let's stop doing it that way. We will announce a single target date at which we will announce all the cases whenever humanly possible. And that's what we do. And I think that's, by and large, makes for a very happy May 1st every year.
I have a quick question.
Yes?
Can external reviews be from outside the U.S.?
Can external reviews be from outside the U.S.? Yes, absolutely. They should be chosen to be the best person, the best people to comment on your scholarship record. When I was at the NSF, people always told me, you can't send it to people outside the U.S. They don't know how our funding system works. I said, well, yes, they do. And their comments were always more important than their summary judgment. You know, they were so worried, oh, this is really a good proposal. And the NSF works on an excellent, very good, fair, or poor system. So it's a really good proposal, so I'll rank it good. Well, they do more than check a box. They write a letter as well. And the content of the letter is what's important. As a candidate, what you'll need to do early in the process is sign a waiver or non-waiver letter. This relates to the degree of access you'll have to your promotion and tenure dossier. I think I've got another slide. I know I have another slide about this, so I'll tell you more about details in a few minutes. You'll provide your curriculum vitae, signed and dated. I got kind of upset when I was being reviewed in my 3-year evaluation, my pre-tenure contract renewal. Different university worked the same way. I like to do subtle things. One of them was I titled my report my 3rd year evaluation instead of my 3-year evaluation because it started at the beginning of my 3rd year and I only had 2 years under my belt. Your CV is submitted during your 5th year and your tenure decision is the end of your 6th year. So you should know that you are welcome to provide updates when you reply. And it's, I think, important to know that you can and probably should do that, particularly if there's this question. In the extreme, if your book's not done yet and your case depends on the book, well, if the contract comes through after you provided this CV, you better let somebody know. Okay. Important things happen. New speaking engagements, a publication that was in preparation is suddenly in press or accepted. Updates are good. Ideally, the update should be an update rather than a new 30-page CV where we have to play Where's Waldo to find the difference. Okay. Send in a report saying this publication, number 13 on the list, has now appeared in print. Okay. Question?
Would those be submitted to the department head, or to whom would those updates be?
Where would the CV update go? It's a good question. It's going to depend where your file is. And perhaps easiest to send it through the department head. If the file's left the department, well, your department head could forward it, or you can forward directly to the dean's office. If it's left the dean's office, and you'll know that because you'll have met with the dean, then you can forward it directly to me. Judith?
Yeah, so maybe, I don't know if all schools and colleges do this, but in the College of Arts and Sciences, we have a meeting with the candidate when the dean's report is completed, and the dean reads his report to the candidate. And I'm in charge of P&T for the college, so I'm present. And at that time, we always say to the candidate, are there any errors in the report, in the letter, in the recommendation the dean has made? And this is an opportunity for you to give us new information. And this is a time when you could update the CV or at least add an addendum to the CV, or get us information about new articles that may have appeared, been accepted, or are in the pipeline. So it's kind of a halfway point. After that, it goes across the street to Johnson Hall, and then we at the college level never hear anything until the letters go out in May.
Right. For those that are maybe watching the video and may or may not have heard that, Judith Baskin pointed out, and it is true, that every dean will meet with the candidate at the point their recommendation about the tenure decision has been made, discuss the case and their recommendation at that time. And at least in CAS and hopefully others as well, that's a good opportunity to assert one more time the opportunity to ensure that the CV in the file represents the current state of affairs. Your candidate statement is also signed and dated. That also can be updated. I'd say I see updates less often than that, or to that than to the CV, perhaps because it's a more general statement about where you are, and where you've been, and where you're going. And that maybe doesn't undergo revision so often. The dating is important, by the way, particularly for the waiver, which I forgot to mention. The waiver relates to whether you're going to see the external letters or not, in short. We'll see more detail about that later. Your department can't request external letters of evaluation for your file until they know what the waiver status is.
Just a quick question about the candidate's statement. How significantly or how different should your final statement be from your third year review statement?
The questions about how much your statement might change from the contract renewal review to the tenure review, I guess it depends. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the statement, and in workshops that are targeting faculty more immediately coming up for tenure, we've got a much more detailed discussion of the statement. But it really should be a critical appraisal of where you are and where you're going. And if your contract renewal several years ago, I would anticipate that there could be a pretty significant updating, at least of the statement at the time of a tenure review. On the other hand, it's designed to be accessible to a non-specialist in your field, and to that extent, maybe the area of your study hasn't changed. And so at least the introductory commentary, you might have nailed it in your third year, and it could still be completely valid after the tenure. It's really going to depend. We've already talked about the fact you'll suggest external reviewers. Again, I'm not going to worry about the details of that because most of you, I think, are going to have a little bit of time before you worry about that. We will have another workshop with details for those about to undergo the process. You'll also provide supplementary materials to your department, the scholarship portfolio in traditional publication-oriented disciplines. That's typically a collection of the publications that you authored during the pre-tenure period. If you're a creation sort of person, the scholarship portfolio may be a set of program notes from performances or photographs of art installations or sculptures or things to that effect. But the documentation of your effort in research or more generally scholarship. If you have publications or presentations or performances and the like in the works, those should be highlighted as well. Again, remember, trajectory is important, so we're trying to establish not just where you are now, but where we can anticipate you going in the future. You'll prepare a teaching portfolio and a service portfolio. The teaching portfolio typically is examples of course materials. We don't want an exhaustive set. You don't need to provide every midterm and final exam and syllabus for every course you taught. But examples of things, particularly those things that make you particularly proud. The service portfolio, we have some guidance on the Academic Affairs website. I'll show you how to find that at the end of the presentation. This is a new opportunity that was crafted under the collective bargaining agreement And as people have had questions about what this might look like, I've referred my own practice, and I don't have to go through this again, fortunately, but my practice that would have been helpful had I is every time I did something and people thanked me for it, basically. I gave a presentation to 1,000 high school kids in inner city LA, and they signed this, I don't know how I captured this, they signed this giant thank you card. It's really very touching. Served as a judge for the Intel Science Fair, and I got my certificate to acknowledge my performance. Every time I get one of those things, I put it in a drawer. It's my feel good about myself drawer. And really, it's a pretty good first pass at what a service portfolio might look like, at least in my eyes. Let's drill into these just a little bit more. Your research or scholarship. Every department has a criteria statement on file. Every department will be revisiting those over the coming year as we reconsider those documents to make sure that they're complete, transparent, accurate, and consistent with the collective bargaining agreement. If you haven't seen your criteria statement, you should. They're available online through the Academic Affairs website. They're probably available from your department head too. But make sure you know. I don't like this term that I'll use it. They're the rules of the game. And I don't like that because this isn't a game. This is pretty serious business. But these are the standards by which your colleagues and the external reviewers and the review committees at the university will be evaluating your success. So you need to be familiar with those. And again, your departments will be recrafting these over the coming year. You should be involved in that process. The focus in general is on the greatest impact. Typically, if you're in a publication field, this would be a high recognition, peer-reviewed publication outlet. If you're an installation artist, it would be installations that recognized important places as a result of peer reviews. So that's overall the focus, is basically doing the best, highlighting it in the best places you can. Doing what's important in your field. I mentioned already, we don't have a metric. Chemistry doesn't say to receive tenure, you must do the following things, and then there's a checklist. It says publish 6 papers, give 3 international conference presentations, invite it, whatever. We don't have those quantitative checklists. There is always an academic judgment about quality and impact. That said, don't ignore the quantity things. And as we go through these revisions of promotion and tenure criteria, we went through a revision a few years ago, and I spearheaded the academic affairs input to those revisions. Typically, departments would say we have no expected number of publications. Quality is more important than quantity. And what I urged departments to do was to understand that that's great, but be completely realistic. If one really high impact, high quality paper is not going to be enough, then to some extent we need to know something about the quality expectations. Linguistics did a very good job with this. They would say quality is more important than quantity. That said, a typical candidate, successful candidate for promotion would have published 2 papers a year, maybe starting the second year. So that tells you, okay, that's 10 to 12 papers. I have 9 and they're really good. I feel pretty good about that. I have 1 and it's great. I don't know, I better be kind of nervous about that. So there is no set metric. We don't have check boxes. There is always judgment. But that judgment is relative to some level of expectation. Okay? I don't see too much confusion. I think my message is getting across. Doing things doesn't necessarily mean you've accomplished important things with respect to your tenure consideration. That one's a little more elusive. I published a textbook as a pre-tenure professor. I felt that it probably wasn't held against me in my field. I didn't think it particularly supported my case. In fact, there were some who worried, why are you spending your time writing a book when chemists write papers? The book had a lot of original scholarship, original creative thought involved in it, so it went beyond simply reporting what others have done. But that's kind of what we're talking about here. What's an accomplishment? We're in the academe, we're basically talking about knowledge creation. If your textbook does a terrific job of presenting work of others, that's a really valuable contribution, probably in the teaching arena or service arena more than in the scholarship arena, because you've taken the work of others and put it into this format. Now, there's always got to be some creative energy that's involved in bringing those things together, I think. But that's sort of the judgment that we're making here. Was there independent creative thought and knowledge creation, or is it more a compilation of the efforts of others?
So another kind of item that I haven't seen on, but I thought it was tenure related in other places, is mentorship. So kind of like how many students do you mentor, where do they end up, do they finish? So that doesn't seem to actually play a role.
The question is about mentorship and does it play a role? It absolutely does. I haven't really gotten to it yet. It's what we are, a graduate research institution, and I think one of the great gifts of us being a graduate research institution is the research opportunity we have to our undergraduates as well. Mentorship is a key component of the evaluation. We typically include it under the teaching side rather than the scholarship side, though in my experience all of these things are, I do curriculum development in the area of green chemistry and sustainability. Is that research? It is. I spend a lot of time in the lab developing new things, creating new chemistry. Is it teaching? Yeah, that's the whole point. Is it service? Well, talk to the school districts and other groups that I work with and helping them develop their own laboratory curricula. So it's everything. And in my statement, which was way too long, but written before these workshop slides were put together, if I did something like that, I highlighted it as in all three of those areas. Mentorship with students. The graduate students I work with, that's a research component for sure. On the other hand, if the only important thing to me was accomplishing my research, why did I take this completely inexperienced first-year graduate student? Why don't I hire a technician or a postdoc or do it myself? It's because it's part of my teaching mission. Okay? So these things blend in, but mentorship absolutely a critical piece of this. Teaching's important. It's one of the big three: research, scholarship, teaching, and service. It really does matter. Ideally, we'd like you to have experience across a range of course sizes, a range of levels. If you haven't taught in Columbia 150, you need to experience that, especially next year after we've renovated, which is about 90% certain to happen, by the way. If you haven't taught a small graduate seminar and you're in a department where that's a possibility, you should have that opportunity. Okay. Different people do well in different settings. Some do well in all the settings, some less well in some settings. You need to have the opportunity to find what works for you. You need the opportunity to contribute to your department in all the appropriate ways. And committees are interested in seeing how you do. Student evaluations are important. They should be important to you. You'll get quantitative numbers, 1 to 5 scale for various things. Look at those. And if you're like me, and they're not as good as you would like, it's okay to not feel very good about it, but don't get down on yourself. Find a chance to do better with them. Read the written student evaluations. Only you will get all the written student evaluations, signed or unsigned. Your department will see only the signed ones. The reviewers will see only the signed ones. Review committees can quote from only signed reviews, which is good because they shouldn't even be seeing the other ones. But you can read them all and decide if they're telling you something important or not. The one that told me I needed a better toupee, that was not very important to me. Especially since I thought if this was fake, I would have a better one. But there's important information, and we're scholars and educators. We want to learn and want to do the best we can. Your peers in your department will carry out periodic evaluations of your teaching as well. They're required at least in the 3 years leading up to your tenure decision year. Tenure decision year is year 6, so you need peer reviews at least once in years 3, 4, and 5. It's up to your department head to arrange those. But you know, department heads are busy, and they're human just like us. So if you're in year 3, 4, or 5 and you haven't had a peer review yet, why don't you mention to your department head, hey, you know, I'm supposed to have peer reviews. They're important. Oftentimes, most of the time, they're positive. And we continue to talk with our teaching effectiveness program staff about how to make these reviews more useful. In part, I think they're useful to senior colleagues who learn from really energetic junior faculty with new ideas about teaching. I think the evaluation, it works better the other direction in some regards than an evaluation of you, but it's a learning experience. If they have things to suggest to you about things that could be done differently, think about them. And you're a professional, you can decide, no, I don't think that's a good idea, or you can decide maybe it is. You can experiment. The teaching effectiveness program I mentioned, Lee Rumbarger, is terrific. They offer a variety of services, most of which I'm afraid to do myself. For example, I will never watch this videotape. I just can't. But if you're able to do that, they will videotape you confidentially. They work only with you. They're not reporting to anybody except you. Okay? They can help you feel more comfortable in the classroom if you don't feel comfortable there. They can help you be better if you don't feel you're as good as you would like to be. Okay? It's a little late woebegonish here, I think. As I read tenure and promotion files, I've seen hundreds. And I can think of a couple where the teaching portfolio seemed to be a problem. It seems like all of our teaching is above average. And I know that can't be true, but people do quite well. In the cases of people who maybe are less above average, or trying to be nice, it's really meaningful for reviewers and review committees to see that that person was trying, that they've engaged with teaching effectiveness, that they talked to their colleagues and tried to get advice. Even if in the end it's not entirely successful, the effort is really important. Show that you care. Okay? And you do. You wouldn't be a professor, I don't think, if teaching wasn't something that resonated with you. Judith, did you?
That was just what I was going to say, that committees like to see if there was an issue or a problem that the person tried and went to the TEP and made efforts.
Good. Take advantage of them. They really are a terrific group. And if you're working on things like writing learning objectives for your course to include in your syllabi, which I hope is not completely alien language to all of you, since we all need to be doing that. Teaching effectiveness program will offer workshops. I will work with them to offer workshops to help you understand how to do things like that. Here's back to mentorship, graduate supervision. Now I've got it under the teaching tab here, if you will, but we are a research university, and mentoring research students is an expectation. Service, as a pre-tenure faculty member, we don't want you to be snowed under with such a service obligation that you can't pay attention to the development of your scholarship, which is the primary consideration, or your teaching, which is the other primary consideration. We also don't want to create a cadre of tenured associate professors who think not doing anything beyond their own self-interest is the right way to run a university. Okay. So service is an important component. You need to start establishing that service record as a pre-tenure faculty member, and promotion to full professor, which we'll talk about with you all in about 5 or 6 years maybe. There will be a heightened expectation. It's not hard to participate in service to your department. Departments generally are pretty good at recognizing opportunities for junior faculty, pre-tenure faculty, to be involved without overcommitting their time and energy. Do be careful about those commitments. The university or college and school level, be careful too. But being careful doesn't mean don't do it. We have an organization called the University Senate, for example. The University Senate is comprised of elected faculty representatives from across the university. They have a lot of opportunity to discuss and have input into the way this university operates. When I was an untenured assistant professor at another school, my department had put me up for election to the University Senate, and I had to spend the next month campaigning with my colleagues to convince them that I didn't really want to do it. I said, no, Bill put me on the list, and I have no interest in serving. There were 14 candidates for 10 positions plus 3 alternates, and I managed to come in number 14. That's not the way it should be. It should be okay to be involved. If you're elected to University Senate and you sign up for every standing committee and subcommittee, people will start to worry because you're going to be spending a lot of time. But serving on the Senate itself, engaging in a monthly conversation, reading the documents every time, no, that's not an onerous assignment, really. And I think it's one of many great opportunities for an untenured faculty member to start to know the university better. So be cautious doesn't mean don't do it. You chose to be at the University of Oregon. This is a terrific place. We all want to participate in making sure it stays that way. And that includes working on the pieces behind the scenes that are required to allow us to have a place at which we do our research and our teaching. If you go crazy overboard, your department head is an untenured assistant professor. I don't think that would ever happen. But you've served heroically. I wrote a 50-page full report comparing my university to 30 other universities in terms of chemistry research space as an assistant professor. I really shouldn't have done that. My department shouldn't have suggested that idea. Fortunately, it didn't impact my research and my teaching. I was doing this fine. But if your scholarship is deficient, if your teaching is not as excellent as we would like it to be, and you were just a hero in the service realm, we'll feel really sorry when we don't get to keep you as a tenured colleague. The waiver. This relates to, again, your access to your file. Most often this would relate to whether or not you see the letters written by external reviewers. By default in the state, everything in your file is available for you to look at. The other extreme would be that you would sign a waiver to everything contained in your promotion and tenure file, in which case all the reports and letters are confidential. You can still hear a summary of what was in those letters, but you would not know who they were written by. The intermediate options, the most common that we see, are a file that's closed. Actually, that one's not so common. The open file, except for the external letters. That's someone who says, yeah, I recognize that the external evaluators should be promised anonymity. I don't want to know who they were. But if people write letters in the university, a colleague writes, somebody from the department, whatever, I want to have access to those materials. And then any other permutation of these sorts of things is possible. The bottom line is the waiver is something that you will decide, and your department can't pressure you on this. You might hear anecdotes or rules of thumb. People might suggest things about what types of letters are submitted by reviewers who know that you might see their letters, versus if they're assured anonymity. Those are, you can consider those sorts of things, but in the end, this is your judgment as to what status of the waiver you would like to have. If you want to have access to the full file, that's what it is. We just need to know so that when we ask people to review your file, they're aware of whether or not you might be seeing what they wrote. I've never written an evaluation letter that I wouldn't share with the candidate that I was evaluating. Others might. I can't assume that everybody works the same way. But it's your decision. The department will present you with the opportunity to make that decision. They then will have a form letter that you sign that establishes that waiver status. And again, that happens early because we have to tell reviewers what your status is. I've only seen this happen once in 7 years, but a case where external letters were solicited, by reviewers that thought they were guaranteed anonymity, and then the candidate signed the no waiver statement, say, I'm going to see everything. The department had to write back to each of those reviewers apologizing and asking if they would like to reconsider their letters based on the fact that the candidate might see them. We don't like to do things like that. Your CV, if you're new, it's kind of early to be worrying about this, but it's not. You don't want to sit down 5 years from now and have to remember what you did for the past 5 years. So keep your CV up to date. Okay? Include your teaching and service. I'm a chemist. Chemists don't talk much about those things. My CV a few years ago was only my research-related activity. I fortunately had to prepare annual reports every year, as we talked about, and I still had a drawer full of those. And I went through and spent about a week extracting the different courses I taught and what terms I taught, the different service responsibilities I had taken on through the years. But now I simply update. If I do something new, put it in the CV. In your education, include when you got your degree. We're not deciding how old you are. We're trying to decide how long ago you were at an institution that might have people we'd like to ask about, might use for external reviews. If you got your PhD at Berkeley 20 years ago, we're probably not going to worry about asking a faculty member there. If it was 2 years ago, or 5 years ago, we might worry that we're asking someone that is too closely related to you. Tell us who your mentors were. It's embarrassing when we ask for a letter of evaluation from someone who turned out to be your teacher, your PhD advisor, and because we typically want to avoid those close relationships. The NSF, it's a lifetime ban on reviewing proposals from a mentor or from a former student. We don't have that strong a restriction here, but we like to maintain this arm's length or better of the reviewers from the candidate. The rest of this, it goes on for too long really, but it involves making sure you present a complete and fair presentation of your activities that is designed to provide an objective overview of things without inadvertently perhaps giving a sense that you're trying to obfuscate. So if you have peer-reviewed publications and non-peer-reviewed publications, remember peer-reviewed carry the greatest weight, separate them. Don't ask a reviewer to go through a single list of publications and decide which ones he or she thinks are the most important and which are more peripheral. Not peer-reviewed doesn't mean peripheral, it's just different. So have a separate list for those two. List all your co-authors, unless you're in a higher degree physics and have 500 co-authors. Present the style, or this bibliography consistent with your own field. But again, the key here in your CV is to make it easy for somebody reading your CV to know what your contributions were. I think you can probably read this just fine. These are, well, the people watching the video do that so much. But separate appropriate things. Don't lump too many things together. And I used to do it the other way, but it's actually easier for me to update my CV in reverse chronological order. It's a little bit easier to read as well. And you just draw a line across the point at which reviewers should stop and things like that. This is one of the biggest questions that arises in fields for which a book, a published book, I've already mentioned this a little bit, is the key currency. Again, we don't have simple metrics, so we would never say a published book equals tenure. There's going to be judgment about that book. But there are things that judgment doesn't pervade, and that is we can't consider a book completed until it's completed. That maybe sounds self-evident, but to be clear, when is a book certain to be published? It's when there's a signed contract with a publisher and the manuscript is done. Ideally, the book is in print and you provide a copy in the evaluation file and we'll get it back to you. But if it's under contract and completed, with the exception that most of, say, galley proofs or indexing, that's a book. If there isn't a contract but the manuscript's done, that's not a book. If there's a contract signed but the manuscript's not done, that's not a book either. Okay? And why not? Well, let's be cynical and say, where's the guarantee that it will ever be a book if that's the stage of development? Okay. So that's the sort that's critical to remember. And I do have another discussion if I don't talk too long here about the book, so I'll come back to that in a few minutes. Include your work in progress. Really important, and through the years I've occasionally heard cases where people say they were told not to do that. Trajectory. How can I project your trajectory if I have no information about what you're working on right now? That's maybe arguably the most important piece of information you can give me. Okay. Here's what I've accomplished. Here's what I'm working on now that you can expect to see come to fruition over the next couple, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Okay. So absolutely discuss your work in progress. I need to move on. If things are peer-reviewed, put them in the peer-reviewed section. If they're not, say your dissertation, which is evaluated by your dissertation committee, but probably didn't go through a rigorous peer review process, don't put it in your peer-reviewed publications list. That's the sort of thing where someone, reviewers, like it or not, sometimes see their job as trying to find the warts. Here's a file, I'm going to figure out what's wrong with this, and you don't want to give them an opportunity. Oh, look, they're trying to convince me that they had more publications than they do dissertation. So put things in the right place, be honest about it, and there's no problem. If you're invited to speak, by all means, those are important things. Those are indicators that others in your field value your contributions sufficiently to ask you to stand in front of a group of them and talk about what you've done. So provide all those sorts of listings. If they're invited, that's terrific. Make sure we know you were invited to speak. Invited keynote address, that's pretty good. If you contributed a conference paper, that's important too, especially if it was a refereed contribution, but even if it's not. But again, there's the sorting into different sorts of categories depending on what the context was for that presentation. And the last one, again, is this issue of keeping it honest. If you did a bunch of guest lectures in your department or even in other departments in the university, those are really good things. They're statements from others of the quality of your teaching. I would put those more in the context of a teaching or service contribution though than a research presentation. Candidate statement. Again, we can talk more about this at another workshop for those of you who are closer to preparing us. Relatively short, not 30 pages like mine was. Focused on balancing between a general audience and specialists. Remember, your department will understand what you do. The external reviewers will understand what you do. But after that point, your file is going to go to a series of review committees and a dean and a provost and other review committees, none of whom are specialists in your field. And they want to try to know what we do and why it's important. So balance appealing to the specialists in your statement with clarifying what you do to the generals. My favorite story here was a mathematics professor up for promotion or tenure, I forgot which at this point. And most of our mathematicians work in pretty abstract theoretical things. And I pride myself on understanding lots of things, but most of what our mathematicians do, I just don't get. It's a different language that they speak. Well, this statement started with sort of an executive layperson summary about what the candidate did. And about midway through the second page, the person wrote something to the effect of, if you're not an abstract mathematician, you might want to stop reading here. And it then launched into the terminology and symbols and equations that if you're not an abstract mathematician, don't mean anything to you. Committees loved that report because they read that first page and a half and they thought they not only understood something about this person's scholarship, but they thought he was a terrific teacher. Because he got them to believe they understood something about his scholarship. What you've accomplished, what you're doing now, what you're planning to do, those are the things you want to talk about in your statement, establishing the word, the trajectory. A new piece of the statement that we're seeing this year for the first time under the collective bargaining agreement, you're asked to include in your statement a statement regarding your contributions to institutional equity and inclusion. To some people that resonates, they know exactly what they're going to say. To some people they will deer in headlights and that they may not have a clue. We've provided a guidance document about this. We have consultations about this as well if there's any confusion, but in its broadest sense, it's what you've done with relation to equity and inclusion. Question?
Yeah, I'm just wondering about the general versus professional readership issue, because it's the same statement that goes to the external reviewers, and I feel like people often want to speak to them. That's their pride. The feeling is that they're the ones they want to convince that are most, that are going to get what it is they have to say, too.
Yes. The question about general versus professional readership of the candidate statement, it is true that especially as a pre-tenure assistant professor, you want to impress those experts who are going to read your file to the best of your ability. So it's acceptable, this mathematics example, to sort of have two sections, one for the generalist, one for the specialist. You don't have to dumb down what you do to the point that someone in a completely alien field will feel proficient at what you do. But also remember that the external reviewers are going to get your entire scholarship portfolio. So they will see your publications or the photographs of your installations or creations or CDs of your compositions or performances. So they have the professional record in your discipline. And honestly, I think that I see some tendency of external reviewers to appreciate, kind of in the sense that I talked about for the mathematics professor, to appreciate a candidate's ability to bring what they do to a broader audience. So don't make it a Time magazine brief article about your work, but also don't make it a piece that could be published in the most applied journal in your field. So some sort of balance. The statement, I think we've already seen this, is significant focus on both the scholarship and the teaching. Less so, but still important to cover, your service contributions. I suggest here something that you ought to consider. Use your statement if there are things in your file that might confuse a reader. Place yourself in a position of someone who is reading your file and evaluating and deciding what to recommend. If you co-author all your articles and you list your articles, your authors in alphabetical order, and your last name starts with a Z, don't let anybody look at your publication list and say you're the last author on every article, so you haven't done much. Make sure they know that you list authors in alphabetical order, in which case you might want to clarify what your contributions were to those co-authored works. Okay. Don't let them ask questions without giving them a good answer. If there's a gap in your publication record, this one's a little touchier, I think. You know, there's a 3-year gap where you had no publications, and then they came back strong. You know somebody's going to look at it and they're going to wonder what happened. Maybe it's none of their business. And that's why you need to make a decision. Maybe it was about a severe depression and you couldn't write an article for 3 years, and now you're back and in the last couple of years everything's great again. I don't know if it's their business to know that, but they're going to wonder about it. Maybe it was you completely switched fields and it took 3 years of experimental work to get to the point that you had a new publication. That one's easier to handle. I can't tell you what to do in the ones where it's a more personal potentially none of your business case, except to recognize that people are looking for unusual things, and a gap in a publication or scholarship record is one of those things people take note of. So see if you can find a way to address that in a way that's appropriate for you. And if you can't, then, you know, let them say what they're going to say, and hope that your colleagues understand that your colleagues will have a fuller picture of what's going on, and no one person can influence your case to the decision point. So there are other opportunities, but to the extent you can, think about how your statement can help a reviewer not have a problem. You're teaching, we're starting to get kind of detailed here, and I think we're running short of time and patience, so let me speed up just a little bit. You'll list all the students you supervise. This relates back to the question about mentorship. It helps if you separate. So these were dissertation, the doctoral students. These were the ones for which I was the chair of the dissertation committee. These others I was member. These I was advisor, whatever the relationships might be. Separate for master's or for honors thesis students and so on. This last point, if it makes sense to you, read it. If it doesn't, don't worry about it. But in some areas, you have lots of independent study students, and well, honestly, most people miss those, and I think that's okay too. If you had 100 independent studio students in music, why not listen? They were your students. The teaching portfolio, we've already talked about, representative but not exhaustive. Also under consideration in the evaluation of your teaching are a number of things that you don't need to provide as a candidate. If you're as a department head, these are the things you'll need to worry about. The courses that were taught, the quantitative evaluations provided through the electronic system that we have, the written evaluations to students. List of teaching awards always seems to me that a candidate ought to be able to help with that, and I think the candidate should. They should be in your CV. Be proud of those things. Evaluation forms, quantitative summaries, peer evaluations. All of those are things that the department should take care of for you, but if you're a candidate, you should be aware of the fact that those things are being looked at. And the service portfolio, I talked about this already. So here's some language from the CBA regarding what sorts of things might appear in a service portfolio, things like op-ed pieces, white papers, commendations, letters of appreciation or awards. And for me, it's my feel-good drawer in my desk. You're allowed to provide a brief narrative about your service contribution. This would be separate from the service statement in your candidate statement. You're not required to provide that, but you can. And again, we have a guidance site available. I'm going to give you a much shorter URL to look at in just a minute here, so you won't have to try to copy that one down. Department will also load into your file the departmental P&T criteria document. We talked about that. You're going to see it if you haven't already. You're going to be involved in its revision this year. The waiver or non-waiver, the department solicits the external reviewers. You can suggest them, the department selects them. And the department again provides all the teaching documentation. The department head will prepare an independent evaluation and recommendation about your case. We have a workshop for department heads, so we'll provide more information to you out there. The department head takes into account the department committee's discussions and report, but is expected to go beyond. The department head is the head. We expect an independent appraisal. It's very often consistent with the tenor of a departmental conversation and discussion and recommendation, but it doesn't have to be. In particular, we like the department head to discuss things that will be confusing to later stage review committees that haven't been appropriately discussed already. If you didn't talk about author order in your statement, we want the department head to talk about it. Student letters. You're allowed to have letters from students written regarding your file. The department can solicit them, you can solicit them, they can be submitted unsolicited. Since I'm talking about and trying to give advice here, I can have a personal opinion about this, I believe. My experience is that letters from students are not typically, that doesn't mean not ever, they're not typically very influential in the decision process. And I thought about the simplest way to describe it, and I'll say it's primarily I feel that way because students, by and large, are not familiar with the promotion and tenure process and what tenure means and how the consideration is carried out. A student, maybe a former student in class years, maybe a research student, they've got important insights into you as a mentor. Mentorship is one piece of a very complicated puzzle that we're looking at here. And again, my experience is that student letters typically are laudatory, they're wonderful things for you to receive and comments for you to hear, but they're not very influential in the ultimate determination of whether or not to award promotion and tenure. Doesn't mean you can't have them, you're entitled to have them. It means that if you're worried about your likelihood of getting tenure and you recruit 50 students to write letters for you, you shouldn't assume that that will make a big difference. Final little bit here, sorry, maybe this will answer any questions that I might have had time to answer otherwise. Things that might complicate your consideration: timing, early versus on time. We talked about credit for prior service. It's important for us to establish whether your tenure review is on the standard timeline or if it's accelerated. We do accelerated reviews. You're just kicking it 4 years out. It's very clear what's going to happen. You say, why are we waiting? We're just giving other universities a chance to try to steal this person. Let's put this person up for tenure right now. There are compelling cases that can be made from an early decision. Compelling is not, they're good enough. We're not looking for good enough for an early decision, we're looking for really good. Yes?
I'm just wondering, if one uses the credit for service in a prior institution, does one then technically get considered as an early case and with those standards, or is it considered the standards of a normal?
Thanks for asking that. If you have credit for prior service and you use it, you're considered an on-time promotion. If you don't use it, you're still considered an on-time promotion. There's no such thing as a late tenure consideration. But so you're not early, and that is important to establish. So typically in an early case, we want to see somebody really kicking it. And an on-time is meeting, ideally exceeding the expectations of the department and the university. We say here outside offers don't drive early decisions. You've got a tenured offer from USC. We will not grant you tenure on the basis of their evaluation. It doesn't mean we might not be responsive and say, holy smokes, they're offering our assistant professor tenure, maybe we ought to be looking at an early promotion consideration. But that would still go through the full evaluation. If you take leave without pay or take parental leave, the clock stops for a year. We don't have intermediate range tenure clock. We run a single process with a single set of timelines. So if you take 6 months off, we're going to delay your clock for a year because we don't have a process that starts 6 months off sequence. You declare these leave, you take leave, of course, without pay when you take it. If you take parental leave or if you take the extension of the clock due to birth of a child, you declare at the time of that event that you want that consideration. If a couple years down the road, you say, you know what, I'm doing great. I don't want to wait another year. My file is ready. My department supports me. Let's just do it. You don't have to actually take the credit for that leave that you were granted. And if you don't take that credit, it doesn't mean it's an early consideration. It would still be considered on time. The one thing we won't allow is for you to have, say, a birth of a child and 3 years later it's time for your tenure decision and you say, you know, I don't think I've got a very strong case. I need another year, so I'm going to take the year for birth of a child. We require that arrangement be made at the event, not retroactively. credit for prior service, I think I've covered that in enough detail now, thanks in part to this question we had a minute ago. And the book, perhaps we've already talked enough about this too, given the hour. Ideally, a book is published, and then there's no question about the status of its publication. It is there. Here's a copy. I can buy it on Amazon and read 13 reviews. At the least, the contract is signed, and you're not going to do anything other than maybe correct galley proofs or do indexing. 11th hour case, one or both of those things could happen at any time before the provost makes the decision, which again is announced May 1st. So if at the time your file goes in, you've got the manuscript, you're farming for a publisher, you don't have one yet, your department writes a report saying, no, we really wish the book was done because it would be great, but there is no book, so we can't support a positive tenure consideration. It gets to the dean's office, and you've received you've got a signed contract. And this is maybe optimistic, but we see things happen. Okay, the dean gets it, there's a signed contract, so that now the dean says, well, there's a signed contract, but it's a shame the book's not in final form, so I can't support a positive tenure recommendation. If it were done, I would. And then before the provost makes a decision, the manuscript is completed, you've got a letter from the publisher saying, congratulations, we're going to press in June. That's a really important piece of information. We hate to see it play out that way because they come back to trajectory again and seeing something so late in the process. But the bottom line in tenure is that we want to offer permanent employment to those faculty who we would like to have as our colleagues forever. And if a piece of information comes through very late, but it's seminal, it's the critical contribution to his field, the decision could go either way. It's too late. It's an important piece of work, but our projection of the trajectory is such that we can't make that statement of confidence in you that we're going to keep you. Or there could be a decision that, actually this piece of work is of such great value. There would be some analysis of the trajectory. There would have to be some powerful belief in the future productivity as well. But the argument could be made. That said, I would love it if we never saw the 11th hour case. If the book was done, from the start when your tenure decision is required. And so I understand life is complicated, research and scholarship is complicated, but do your level best so you're not one of those ones where people are agonizing up until the last minute trying to decide if it's enough. Okay? Finally, that's it. This is me. I'm happy to answer questions in person or on the phone or by email at any time. academicaffairs.uoregon.edu will be the gateway to finding lots of other stuff. And I put a web shot here with 2 circles. One is there under appointments and promotion. If you hover your mouse over that, it'll pull down these menus and you'll find promotion and tenure tab. Look there. And then also on the main page, under the collective bargaining agreement, there's a section titled Implementation Resources that I think you will find very useful. It includes some of the documents I've shown you here. Barbara.
Ken, talking about the collective bargaining agreement, could you address just briefly the new requirement in the CBA about a statement concerning the candidates' contributions to institutional equity and inclusion?
Barbara has asked me to comment about the contributions to equity and inclusion. And I had a link up here, at least.
You did, thank you. Do you want to, for people who've been here for a year or two, they came in at a point when that wasn't yet in the tenure dossier, and now it is. I didn't know if you wanted to elaborate a little bit about it, or if people had questions or not.
I talked briefly about it, I think. Are there questions that I can address at this point that would help understand what we mean by this? because I tell stories, let me start with mine. When I first saw this, my initial response was, what would I say about that? Because it's always about me, right? And my scholarship, I'm an administrator now. I'm still a chemistry professor. Chemistry is my one true love, and what I maintain activity in within chemistry is developing, like I mentioned this earlier, developing laboratory materials in the area of green chemistry and sustainability. And my focus in doing that has evolved through the years. It started by trying to cut my contact hours in the teaching lab here, to be honest with you. But it evolved to the point that my passion is bringing experimental science to the hands of students of all ages, no matter where they are or how little they have. So I'm designing laboratory curricula for students in rural Thailand who have nothing, basically, except what they're surrounded with, and so I explore and see what's there. Anyhow, I approached it from a science perspective. It took a turn to recognizing that I was allowing myself to teach experimental science to students regardless of resources. But really, it took me a while longer before I realized that might constitute in anybody's mind but my own at the time an important contribution to equity and inclusion. It is. This is bringing education to students who wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity.
But
What you
institutional doesn't mean you owe only? I mean, it sounds like your example is outside of UO.
That's a good question. That's in Thailand. What about the U of O? What about institutional equity and inclusion? Barbara, do you want to respond for it? I'm going to say that if this institution can make its mark on the world, that's a contribution to the institution.
Yeah, I'd agree with that completely, Ken. I think we're all expected to take our scholarship, our creative work out into the world and establish a national and international profile. If your diversity and equity work is in the arena outside the campus, I think that would be great.
And I think the bottom line in this is that we want people to have the opportunity to think about the impacts of what they're doing. And maybe that says it all. It's what you do is not going to sound anything like what I just described. A number of years ago, the NSF went to 2 criteria for evaluation proposals from 4, and the second criterion was broader impacts. And the whole science community went crazy, thinking, oh, we have to design better widgets. It's applied science, not fundamental. And then they went to say, oh, well, see, I have an African-American student in my research group, so I make a contribution, equity, inclusion. And in the end, we ended up holding workshops, and we've done one of those here with the Office of Equity and Inclusion, and we'll do it again this year, I believe. Having members of the community, of our community, discuss the sorts of things that they've been doing, and it's all over the map. And the intention was to illustrate that there's no single answer, there's no single expectation with regards to this. It's simply thinking about the impact of what you do and enunciating. And sometimes that's enunciating it to others, and sometimes, perhaps like in my own case, it was recognizing it myself first. Yes?
Just another question pertaining to the situation of years for prior service. A colleague in another department suggested to me that perhaps if one is in that situation where one has time that one can use or not use, one feels confident one could turn in one's tenure file, and that if problems arose at various levels, at a certain point it could be taken back and one could try again next year. And I'm wondering if that's a thing or not, or if you can comment on that.
The question is if you're eligible for consideration for tenure in an on-time consideration in the case for credit for prior service, would there be a problem with launching the trial balloon in essence, and if there were snags, then to pull it back and hold off for another time? I don't want to recommend that process. In particular, I'd say if your department is not strongly supportive of your case. The department's just one stop along the way, and I want to be careful about not over-empowering a department. I'll try not to make this too complicated. If your department thinks it's too early for you to come up for tenure, and you agree with them, then you shouldn't even start. If you think they're wrong, then you'll need to evaluate where you are with respect to the department. Why are you having this disagreement? Objectively, is your case as strong as you'd like it to be, or is it a case, I'll come up with a semi-hypothetical, you've got $1 million grant, it's terrific, and having a grant like that is a gateway to tenure in your department, but it's got to be renewed. It expires in June of this year, and I want my tenure decision to happen before then, because I don't think it's going to get renewed. So you're trying to rush the process. Maybe your department's opinion is important and you should hold that. Does your department head have it in for you and is dictating the process in some way, and you think, I've got a really strong case? You can put it forward, and it's not required for a department to endorse tenure and promotion for a candidate to be successful. It's not a great way to start the process, but it's not required. But so if you're in the judgment year of, I don't need to come up for tenure, but kind of want to, it's really going to be very situation dependent. Conversations with others could be really useful. Members of the department whose opinion you value, you can talk to the dean as well, friends in other departments, whoever you might think of, trying to make the best informed decision. The one thing you can't do is have an unsuccessful tenure consideration and then say, well, I still have 2 years of credit, so I'll come up again. We only do one full tenure review.
So that's not the case that one could pull one's file.
At what point
I'm just
could one?
talking about the imponderables of like, you have support, everything looks good, but oops, there was this terrible external review, or oops.
Past practice has been, once the dean makes a recommendation, the dean will call you in and meet with you to talk about that recommendation. If the recommendation is to deny tenure, long practice has been for the candidate to have the opportunity to do two things. One is to write a response to the dean's recommendation that's included in the further review. The other would be to decide not to move the file further forward, and a one-year term of contract, I hate that word, one-year non-renewable contract would be issued. And you would be writing off the opportunity for a tenure consideration. In practice, there have been times when a file was withdrawn from consideration after it left the dean's office and before it got to before the provost made a decision. That's something I think would be an interesting, broader conversation to have, is at what point is it too late to withdraw a file? We don't like to tell people they can't have tenure, but I also don't want to jigger the process so that we say every candidate that's come up for tenure has been successful, because we've told the ones that weren't going to be successful to pull the file. That's dishonest, I think. But so there has been a practice, an opportunity, perhaps as late as just before the provost decision withdrawal. Ideally, I think the notion of making a decision at the dean's recommendation level is the right place to draw the line. But there is no firm line drawn now.
So in the case of somebody who would like to come up early, like even before their credit, does that require the department heads and the dean's approval, or is that just their decision to make and we weigh in on it, however we weigh in on it?
For a truly early promotion, there should be a discussion with the department and the dean. If the department or the dean don't support the early promotion, it's going to be difficult to make the case that this is one of those, holy cow, look at how good this person is cases.
So, but that's, I don't know, I mean, that seems odd to me because that's kind of weighing in before we actually review the whole file. If you say, I mean, it's different to say, I support the case versus I support your decision to proceed.
I understand. I hear what you're saying, and there is some element of prejudging the case. but the prejudging is being done by people that will be in important positions of doing the actual judging as well. And again, it needs to be a discussion. When I decided I was done with my PhD work and wanted to finish my dissertation, well, it was half written before I told my mentor that, but when I first when I told him, hey, I think I'm done, he looked kind of stunned and said, let me think about that, and then he got me back later and we talked, and at the end of it, okay. So it should be a discussion. And if I worry about, okay, what if the department head doesn't support it? Well, that's why I think talking to the dean as well. Are the department head and the dean in collusion to hold you down? Well, then maybe we need a different discussion. But the bottom line, I think, is in that discussion, you need, if they haven't suggested this, then you need to be helping them see why this makes perfect sense.
Well, let's say we've, I don't know, let's say we've done that and they still want to proceed and we're a little uncertain about its viability, and we advise them of that.
I'm a little worried about giving a hard and fast answer to that. I want to look at CBA language to be absolutely clear. I have a CBA expert who may be able, or a couple who might be able to help me. My sense is that early promotion is called for to follow discussions with the department head and the dean. Barbara, please.
I would weigh in by saying that there is far too much at stake to take any unnecessary risk. And so if at the department level there's any implication about it, I would say wait a minute. I just don't see the advantage.
Yeah, I understand the logic. I just don't know about their rights if they decide. I hear all that, but I want to do it anyhow. But that's maybe this is too complicated.
Yeah.
Well,
I've never seen it happen.
Okay.
So I can't look at prior practice or experience. I'd say if someone said, we've had our discussion and I understand you don't support it, but I'm submitting my materials for promotion. I anticipate a number of conversations with a variety of people, but I don't know that the process would exclude that possibility. I think it would probably have a painful outcome.
I would suggest that they check with their union. Yeah. But I think it would also be fair to make absolutely clear in a non-confrontational way that if the person insists on going forward what the department has implications, it will indubitably be reflected in the file, and you won't be able to endorse it as strongly as you might be able to a year later, so that it would actually compromise the chances of the file. But I think that's a great question to take to the union, actually.
Thank you.
Yes.
Quick question, Ken. On the supplemental file, do you have a candidate who, often if they are going from associate to full, who has numerous publications, specifically books, rather than carting over a wagon full to Johnson Hall, could we photocopy the covers and table of contents, or with electronic formats? Is there a precedence that's happening now for those?
The question is about supplying the supplementary material, particularly a case with lots of publications or books. If there are so many that you can make the judgment that a sampling is sufficient to support the scholarship. There's no requirement that the scholarship portfolio, particularly for promotion to full professor, be comprehensive. There are some people who have hundreds of publications, and they would maybe provide 10 or 15 of what they thought are the most influential or most representative. So I think you can make a judgment. With a bunch of books, some departments have hand trucks.
Okay, I'm just curious.
But we can talk about that. I know that having them available for the review committees to look at is, I think, a critical piece of it. If the committees aren't going to look at the supplementary files, then we shouldn't have supplementary files.
Sure.
All right, I'm happy to stay a little longer for one-on-one, but it's after 2, so I should let the few hardy souls who are still here go now. Thank you.
Thank you.